welcome everyone. We'll just have that awkward minute or two while everyone seems to log on. So welcome to those who are on time. Really appreciate it. While we're waiting, Easter coming up. Zubair, doing anything?
No, it's actually been quite good. No real plans apart from a couple of dinners, but yeah, really need the downtime. So yeah, looking forward to 4 days off.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Arvin, what about yourself, mate?
Nothing much. Probably will go to zoo with kids, have a young family, so need to keep them entertained. So yeah, that's pretty much, and stuff at home. That's about it.
Oh, good stuff. Mr. Ego, what about you, mate?
Football season starts for the kids soon, so we'll be out there in the yard drilling balls at the wall.
And whipping them to make sure they don't go corners. Yeah, I know that.
And yourself?
Going away to the Coromandel, actually. Quite looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So it's been 3 days down there. Unfortunately, the weather doesn't look that great. So landed along grey cloud over here at the moment. So yes. Okay, well, let's get this underway. Still got people logging in, but to those, as I said before, who've logged on already, welcome to our first webinar of 2024. Very hard to believe that it is the end of March, given it didn't seem that long ago that we were celebrating Christmas and New Year's, which I'm sure everyone feels the same. Today, as it says, we want to talk about IFRS 16 and how we can get a bit more strategic about it with regards to year end, because it's coming up for both Australia and New Zealand. It's honest now for New Zealand and certainly coming up for Australia. You know, what can we do to try and help everybody taking the learnings that we've had, that our panelists and that have had, and seeing if we can help you fit that into your process. So, what are we going to talk about today? First, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can actually take a helicopter view of your IFRS 16 process. Reason being is that 2019 was when IFRS 16 first kicked off, so people were starting to 2017, 2018 looking at this. There wasn't any precedent at the time, so it wasn't as though you could go, oh, this is how we do it, it's all brand new. So all that process, policy, etc. that was developed at the time probably hasn't been updated. So really, really important to go back and actually look at that. That there will show what's been overlooked, certainly areas that are pain points, etc. We're going to go into what actually a good process should look like. We really appreciate that everyone's got different processes, different drivers, different internal mechanics, but there are some key things that we can work on that will help make that process a lot better. Benefits, I think it's pretty plain to see, but sometimes you've got to hear it out loud from other people to know what they are and appreciate them that much more. And then, you know, what we can do to streamline the process, etc. Talk about all these fun things. You know, ESG's been around a little while now, and it's sort of been dominating. But this crazy world of AI has become, certainly in the last year since we did something similar, AI has become a lot more relevant. So quite a bit to get through. And to help me get through it today, we have some fantastic panelists. To my left here, Zubair Khan from Vulcan. Vulcan, as many of you may know, is a ANZ-based leading provider of aluminium and other metals. It's a big company, gone through a lot of change, acquisitions in that in the past couple of years. So really keen to get your insight on that. And then on the other line, we've got Parvin Yanamadra with us, who runs the finance team at Perenti around this. So has a really good view of a really large global player with regards to Perenti, mining services, obviously very diversified as well. So his insights are going to be really, really interesting on this. Across the table from me, my old mate, Stefan. Stefan's the CFO here at Quadrant. His role's quite diversified and his insights are actually really, really handy because not only does he wear his CFO hat, but he also wears almost like a SaaS hat with regards to the LOIS system and some of the processes that we're working on with our clients. Finally, myself, for those of you who I haven't met, my name's Damon. I run the sales side for our LOIS SaaS product here across Australia and New Zealand. So been involved with the company and leasing for the better part of the last 2 decades with Quadrant, and certainly seen a lot of change in that respect. So welcome everyone. Really look forward to your insights in that as well. Some housekeeping for those of you who may have to get off if you've got other meetings. We're going to send a recording around, etc. of this following, and we'll also send the slides. And yeah, if you've got any questions, please use the questions in that around the Zoom link. So, current economic environment, it's a tough market. Zubair, what are your views?
I tend to agree with you. There's no backing down from that. We are currently going through a very tough market, and as a business, I think we see that as quite a good opportunity. So when things are slow, we are going through a downturn. That's probably when you want to double down and improve your business, improve your processes, become more efficient, right? Because the reality is the market's going to come back at some stage, and if you're a much better business, you're well capitalized to sort of gain from that economic recovery.
Yeah, I think it's a really progressive view on it, because we're seeing the other side at the moment is the cost out piece. Talk about a bit later. Harvin, what about from your perspective?
Damon, from mining services perspective, demand for mining services is always based on demand for commodities, right? So I think in the recent past, everyone is aware of lithium and nickel. Basically, prices when they took a nosedive, and it definitely has an impact on the market as such, the whole mining services market. And also, I think whenever these things happen, the exploration, which is the first pass of the whole mining process, the funding for that dries out, which means it will have an impact on future pipeline. So I think it's going to be interesting few years from here on. The small, probably last 4 to 5 months will have an impact. It has a domino impact on future. So it's going to be an interesting one to see. Definitely tough though.
No, and I think that's probably across a lot of industries, but obviously mining, certainly in Australia, is a huge part of that environment. If we sort of change tack slightly, Stefan, and we look at what's going to be right in front of us, right here, right now, from an audit perspective, we've got New Zealand clients going into it immediately next week. Obviously, our Aussie mates in June. What are the auditors in that looking at? What's the sort of feel at the moment and feedback you're getting from them and from clients?
I think it's now a pretty established standard. We've had 3 odd years of it in the wild, so to speak. Auditors are actually kind of familiar with the standard now, whereas early on they weren't. So they know what to look at. So you tend to find those companies with systems and processes that are good actually have less work done. It's just the judgment kind of things on IBR rates, modifications, and the like. However, those that have not got systems in place are going to get a much harder time of it, because you can kind of excuse a year or 2, but then after that, if you're relying on spreadsheets and the like, it's going to get difficult.
I think it's a really good point, because we notice from the lower side of the business, come October, reporting season just finished, and all of a sudden there's this deluge of client activity. Sort of, what do you put that up to? And we've seen it grow over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's just a basic function of the pressure goes on compliance to get it done. If you're not doing it, people look at that process and assess the risk. There's always a cost to compliance, but you get to a point that you can't delay it, or you need to do it.
There's a lot of talk about cost out at the moment. I think there's also a focus, and we sort of see this in the conversations we have with a lot of clients, is that people's time isn't free, and I think there's becoming a more and more greater realization of that going forward. So people have been asked to do a lot more with less at the moment. How do you view that? Certainly going back to your comments before, Zubair.
Yeah, so the way we sort of view it as a business is it's not always about cost out. Yes, we have to maintain cost efficiency to, be competitive, but a lot of the time it's actually freeing up your staff, whether it's that extra 2 or 3 days in the month where they can actually focus on value-added work rather than, boring, routine sort of data entry sort of work. And I think that also helps employees be more engaged in the work that they do. But it really comes down to, how can you be better?
Yeah. Pavan, similar for yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting, especially mining services industry is highly cost conscious. Even whether there is downturn or not, it is highly cost conscious. And I mean, to give you an example, some players pride themselves on run to failure for their core equipment. That means they will not incur unnecessary maintenance if it's not going to add value. So with that backdrop, there's always appetite to bring efficiencies, reduce costs. That's a constant thing for mining services. So yeah, it's interesting.
Is there a view at the moment, if you took an investment, to your CFO, etc., to save money, that would be viewed well, as opposed to top down, cut costs? Is there an even flow around that?
Yes. I mean, definitely there is a rational thought process which goes through whenever there are decisions to take cost out, because I mean, more than cost out, we look at savings to start with. And when the cost outs will come only when the things are pretty dire after a point. So
yeah, fair enough. Stefan, I mean, I saw this phrase the other day, survive to 25. What's your view?
I mean, that's obviously, New Zealand's been hit pretty hard, maybe Australia less so. Our interest rates are high. We're struggling to get inflation down, and it's hard being a business when you've got high inflation and high interest rates. We're seeing it across the board with all our customers, which are mainly enterprise-based. But there is a view, and back to Zabia's point, that you ride out this year, be as efficient as you can, because as they push interest rates higher, obviously inflation should at some stage go down, and then you'll get that kind of hit the top of the curve and start going back down again, which is always a good time to make money.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's why we sort of had this slide. Once you get an understanding of it is a tough market, like anything, peaks and troughs, but what you do now to actually help yourself going forward is going to be quite important. Okay, we're going to have a poll. So since inception, 2019, have you reviewed, updated your IFRS 16 process? So really keen to see what the answers are here. So I will put up a poll. There we go. So if you can just tap away. While you're doing that, just to put it in perspective, 2019, when IFRS 16 was implemented as such, 5G was just starting. There are a few cryptocurrencies going around. You started getting biometrics on your phones, so the Face ID and all that. All these things now, which are pretty commonplace. So you can see how far things have moved. And probably the biggest one is they started talking about AR and all that, which was quite cool, but also this thing about machine learning and AI, which, as we know now, has just gone through the stratosphere. So if we have a look at this, I'm going to share the results. Yes, so about 40% of people have looked at it, which is pretty good. Third have tweaked it, and then you've probably got a further quarter who haven't looked at it. So that's pretty good. It's probably a bit more than what I suspected, to be honest. But I think what we're going to go through today is just reinforce how process review is really, really important going forward. So. Okay, helicopter view. Stefan, where do we start?
So obviously every business is different, but we've obviously seen lots of different businesses and how they go about it. And one of the key things is really understanding the data. What tended to happen on the transition to IFRS 16 was everyone just focused completely on the data and getting only the data points finance needed. So what we're seeing happen now is people are going back to the data, but looking at all the data points for all parts of the business. So we're seeing not just to focus on the dates and the payments, which accounting needs from a IFRS 16 thing. but also what a property need, what a fleet need, what do they need to do to make informed decisions, and also understanding that flow of the data and the information. So that was another area that wasn't well understood on transition, because people tended to do a big project, collate the data and stick it in, and they didn't really have the understanding of where it was coming from, who needed it, and what it was required. So when we say about going backwards, the lease accounting was being achieved, and it was achieved quite well for transition, but a lot of companies then struggle to get that regular update and constant information. So a constant gripe from clients is around, oh, property didn't give us this information, we didn't process it in time. And that was really because businesses didn't understand that flow of information and the data points that they needed. So when you look back at it, what you need to do is go up a bit higher and understand that flow. So what kind of leases have I got? Who procures them and controls them? What's important to them, all the way through to the lease accounting. So it's actually not going from the compliance backwards, it's actually moving forward from the lease source and through to that way. And then what we're seeing a lot of clients do now is they can actually start using that data properly to actually make people's jobs and lives easier on the commercial side, and informed commercial thing, and also take that data all the way through to have a much more streamlined process. Whereas at the start, it was very much, I need these data points, I need an output, but I'm not quite sure how I'm getting it all.
Is it fair to say as well, at the start, most people's data points were very restricted just around the compliance, and now how, I mean, like everything that I think all organisations are doing, data is so important. So growing those data points with regards to your leasing portfolio becomes that much more important for decision making.
Yeah, definitely. So we saw lots of clients, they just got the big data points, they got the property, they got the payments and the timeframes, and they made the assessments about renewals and did that accounting stuff. Meanwhile, property going, well, just wait, when's my renewal date and when's my price increase? And all that data was there but not captured. So we're actually seeing clients going back up the chain now and getting that data and reporting on that data, so that actually it's not just a accounting tool, it can be used by property, it can be used by fleet, and then you can make better commercial decisions. Another area that's become really prevalent is everyone said, oh, this IFRS 16 stuff is a pain, we won't do low value leases, they're exempt, so we don't need to do it. Trouble with that is they still need to disclose the low value leases, so then people fell back to spreadsheets and they weren't controlling the low value leases, which could be lots and lots of stuff that commercially is not making sense to do that way.
Is it also fair, if you say you've got a system in place, it's the utilisation of that system to not necessarily its capacity, because not a lot of people do that, but maybe more than 20%?
Yeah, well, the trick with any system is you only know what you know, right? And that's for all users of the system, that when you're focused on getting compliance, you get compliance in place. And then you can tweak your system, but you're still going to be focused on compliance. What we've seen now, 3 years in, is people are now pretty happy with that process. So they're going back down the chain to try and see what else they can do to leverage the system. So we've seen a real movement towards capturing other data points, but then producing it in a more meaningful way for the users that are not necessarily just the finance people doing debits and credits, but maybe the property people or the fleet people, or even the ESG people doing emissions and the like. So by having a system and a centralized database, that gives that opportunity.
Yeah, makes sense. Parvin, Perenti and actually Vulcan's very similar, the Zuvia. You guys didn't go into a system straight away. You want to talk us through that, sort of the process that you went through around that decision?
Yes, I mean, I think it was more at that. I mean, when we look at 2019, the standard was new. There were few players in the market who had products, including you guys, and it was an interesting time that time. No one knew what tools were. People were waiting to see what emerges onto the top, and they just wanted to have something tested. Okay, I think that was something which has driven most of the companies to go with Excel spreadsheets properly. I mean, like it was not the most efficient, but at that point in time, there were few macros that were available, and we've just chosen those. But once you put all the leases into those Excel sheets, you realize that how painful it is. So that basically drove the decision for many of the players to move and seek tools that will help them to manage their leases better.
Funny you say that. So we had one client that I remember talking to, and they couldn't change from Windows 16 to the next version up because it blew up all their IFRS 16 spreadsheets.
Yep.
So it was literally holding up that. Zubair, what about from your perspective?
Probably similar comments, if I can echo similar comments that Pavan had made. Same thing, right? 2019 IFRS 16 was very new. And I still remember when the board had asked us to explain what IFRS 16 was in 2019. And obviously, I think there's two reasons why we didn't jump on a software. We wanted to give it some time to see who are the players out there and make sure we get a system that's fit for purpose, not implement something and then realize 2 years later we need to change again. Second one was, I think, doing something manually for a period of time, something like IFRS 16. You actually understand what you're looking for in a software and what pain points you're trying to resolve. So I think those are the two reasons, but obviously the catalyst in terms of implementing LOIS for us was we're already spending quite a bit of time in terms of doing IFRS 16 manually on a spreadsheet, half year and year end. Our property portfolio is going to triple in size, right? Sort of go up to 90 leases, and it would have become impossible to manage unless you throw more resource at it. So yeah, that was quite an easy decision for us to sort of move to LOIS post the Old Aluminium acquisition.
Stefan, the difference between now and then, what's the key thing for yourself?
Oh, I think echo the guys' thought that it was new. Obviously, we were lucky in that we had a relatively mature product. But one of the things that is interesting that the process that we run today for new clients compared to the process that we ran 4 years ago in 2019 is much more efficient. We are better at knowing exactly any instance of any lease. I think we've seen all sorts of leases. LOIS has always been very strong on the batch processing, so we can get that data in, we can get it in the format, and we can get it up and running. We can also really advise clients directly on a good process to fit the system. Normally, you don't make your process fit your system, you make your system fit your process. But for IFRS 16, it is a compliance thing. And then what we're also seeing now is rather than just focus on the compliance, getting all this additional information to make good commercial decisions has become so much more important. So 4 years ago, it wasn't a consideration. It was, I want my debits and credits and I want to be up and running. Whereas now we look at that, I guess, almost life cycle of a lease.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that. So for everyone's benefit, and you know, when we're starting looking at the process, guys, in your opinion, is one of those key parts to actually get some advice from others that have seen it, maybe not consultants, or you know, is that something that you sought?
I think so. I think we talked to people, definitely other companies that had used it. That's always probably the best reference point, in my opinion. We also, you know, talked to our auditors, Deloitte, in terms of understanding what they had seen in the market, what works best. And again, that was just buying those 2 years to understand really what was going to suit us. Yeah.
Well, it's like anything, isn't it? It's research, whether you're buying a car, a computer, or something like that. You have to do it.
Yep.
Arvin, was it the same for you guys?
Dima, I mean, you know, we've implemented this at Synergy in 2019. So, I mean, I completely echo what Stefan is saying, that the processes, even from your end, the whole implementation process is so seamless now. We didn't even realize when it was finished, whereas in 2019, all of us were going through that learning curve. So I think for me, I had my own personal experience, but my predecessors over here had already selected the tool based on an evaluation of different tools, and they kind of came up with a similar thing where they were looking for simple, reliable, and accurate process and tool. Simple. I mean, they wanted as simple as possible, no bells and whistles. And I think LOIS basically ticked that box from that perspective.
I think 2019 most people were actually spent most of their time down in the basement trying to find the leases, dusting off the boxes and things like that. That was half the issue. We've talked about end-to-end flow. We'll go on and chat about that in a bit more detail going forward. Now, this one here, question for you both. There was an EY study that literally came out last week around IFRS 16. How many organisations as a percentage do you think still use spreadsheets?
60%.
60? Pardon?
I would go around 60 to 70.
Okay. 42, which is even, we thought was quite a lot. So 42% of organisations that EY studied said that they still use spreadsheets. The crazy bit about that is last year when they did the same survey, 38% use spreadsheets. So it's actually gone up. Why is that?
Well, actually, we see this all the time. What often happens is, back to your point about making that system selection, is you obviously want a tool that does everything you need. But often people make compromises in their assessment. And so your tool might end up doing 80% of your process, but not 100. So 20% will always go to Excel. I mean, it's the accountant's best friend. But then you kind of got to question your choices when you pick the system, that you still have to go back to spreadsheets. So it's probably that reason.
And then potentially the next phase is going and doing the work and going what is actually working and what's not. I think it's fair to say, from a system perspective, when this first happened, there were two types of systems out there. There were property systems that were property centric, and then they had an accounting add-on, and then there were the new financial systems that probably didn't have any property add-ons. So you had those different drivers around that, and we experienced that, didn't we, when with people in the rooms, etc., depending on where they came from, property or finance sort of drove that decision. And that now is coming back into focus a lot more. We talk about pain points when we're going through a process review, actually identifying those. With a bad system, we were talking about it the other day. If you don't know anything else, it's like pinching yourself. The pain goes away after a while, and you can continue to be pinched. The pain's still there, but you just forget about it because that is what actually happens. I mean, from your perspective, what were some of the key pain points that you sort of found when you were going through this process?
Through the implementation, you mean?
Or and the review piece?
I think it was any time there was a modification to a lease, if it was a different scenario, you're scratching your heads trying to understand, read up the standard, talk to your auditors, trying to understand how to treat something. I think having a system, something like LOIS, obviously helps, because you guys have seen more leases obviously than we have. Secondly, I think the other pain point is just the time sink, right? I mean, you spend so much time monthly as well as half year end. So at that point in our journey, we're only reporting in for 16 half year and year end. We've got aspirations to sort of report monthly, which we are at now, but we want to go a step further and get to the granular sort of detail where we can look at sites and toggle between pre and post IFRS 16 results. There's no way you can do that if you don't have a system in place. So those are probably some of the pain points. Yeah.
What about you, Pavan?
No, I think it's pretty similar to what Zubair has said. It's basically, it was too manual in the process. We had 150 leases, so we had 150 Excel sheets, which we had to consolidate to get to a disclosure. Just imagine the pain that anyone had to go through. I had to do it a month, and I hated it. So it's like, I mean, it's not that easy. So it was definitely, for us, that was the thing, and it was also, for us, the main pain point was because of the technical nature of the standard, and we wanted to ensure that integrity of the whole compliance is intact. We've centralized everything, whereas we are spread across 12 countries and across 60 projects. So if we have to, a single person in corporate has to do it, it's inefficient. There was a lot of double handling of information and interdependencies. Even after that, we were losing track. So we thought we would rather get a tool which is easy to understand for people, easy to train, so that we decentralize the whole thing and we can centralize the disclosures, which LOIS helps us in getting it. So yeah, I think that was our pain point, was it was too inefficient after a point.
If from your perspective and what we've seen sort of over time as this has sort of developed, what are the key areas that most organisations are going to have? They may or may not know about it, but are probably most crucial with regards to not a system decision, but a process decision like you talked about before. Know that flow?
Well, I think ignoring IFRS 16 in general, I guess all businesses exist by gathering information and doing something with it. And most of us get that information through the ERP. I think with the rise of SaaS products in general, you've seen a bit of a move away from the ERP as the source of all the truth. It's actually because you can get these bespoke systems that deal with a specific area. You'll see consolidation tools, you'll see analytics tools. But at the end of the day, the process still needs to be gathering those data points, whatever it is you're doing. Everyone talks about big data, but it's true. If you don't have the data points to make good decisions, you won't make good decisions. We'll talk a bit earlier on, and we've got it on that slide. You've got to have good data. It's rubbish in and rubbish out. And also with the rise of all the tools that we're seeing in the market now, AI and all of that, again, it's interrogating data, right? So if you can give good data to your whole process and gather that at a single source, central repository, you're going to start to win straight away. And all systems come back to that idea of being a system of record and then interrogate the data from there. And I think in the early days of all these tools, and the IFRS 16 thing was very much about debits and credits. But actually, if you understand the full lease life cycle, there's a lot of valuable data in there that's actually probably as important, if not more important, than the debits and credits.
If we're talking about pain points, this is one of my favourite topics, the Stockholm Syndrome. I couldn't find a picture that was probably appropriate to put on it. So we talk about the Stockholm Syndrome like we talked about before the pinch. So if you don't, a lot of people grabbed a system, they went through a lot of pain to implement it. There's a lot of workarounds, it didn't work, but now because that has become common practice, all those workarounds, etc., people actually accept them. Like we talked about before, you guys were late adopters of systems. Can you talk us through your sort of implementation experience? As Pavan said, from what it was in yesteryear to what it is now. So people shouldn't be afraid. Implementation or transition or all those sorts of words, people get scared because they think about their jobs or they think about extra time that they don't have. Why should that not be a concern if we're talking about it now from your experience?
Yeah, so if I reflect back, I think to get implementation ready, I can't stress enough, Stefan, your comments around having good data. And obviously, if you look further in the direction the world's going, data's becoming increasingly more important. So it all starts with data, in my opinion. And I think we did quite a good job in 2019 when I had to go through the basement and get the leases. I was like, you want to only do this once, and we captured as much as data as possible. But coming back to the implementation experience we had with LOIS, I think it was very good, and I struggled to think about what the pain points was specifically to do with the implementation. Two reasons. Maybe one is because it feels like it's been so long and I can't remember, or secondly, I'm so happy with the outcome. It doesn't really matter, right, what you have to go through to get the implementation sorted.
Just for the record, we're not paying you to.
No. Yeah, that's not even in my notes here. But I must admit, I was quite demanding from a timing point of view. So coming back to your comments, October, I think it would have been around October, November that I approached LOIS for the first time, and I said I wanted it implemented by Christmas. And I think you guys did a pretty good job of it. So quite demanding from timing perspective and configuration. But yeah, looking back at it, I mean, it's enabled us to free so much time and just be so much quicker in terms of making decisions around property. LOIS didn't have everything, and we provided some feedback to you guys, which you guys took on board. So that's very much appreciated from the team at Vulcan. And, we are looking forward to using the system as a fully fledged property management system as well.
Awesome. What about from your side? Thank you for that. Pavan, something for yourself?
Damon, from our end, as Zubair has said, the implementation was definitely seamless. And when I'm comparing my experience between 2019 at Synergy and here, it's definitely, I mean, it has improved significantly. Okay, where I think your processes have improved too, and it was seamless. It was seamless. And I think for us, it was more, along with the implementation of the tool, we had to go with a change management tool, because any system change or implementation has to be accompanied by the change, that the way we do things, and even probably mindset change to some extent of our business. So we try to pull all of these things concurrently. And I mean, it's been 3 to 4 months, and I think so far it's been really good. Like, we are seeing the results that we were expecting. So the take up from the business has been really good.
So it'd be fair to say, if somebody asked you, you know, if you're sort of worried about those aspects of a ton of resource taken, you know, a ton of pain to do it, to swap over, you'd give them some comfort that it's probably not.
That's what you guys are there for, isn't it?
No, it's not me. It's
I think.
I think, Damon, from our end, I think this time around we went with your extended support option, not just the implementation with extended support, because we were running short on our resources, and that extended support thing was really helpful, because you guys helped in uploading most of the spreadsheets and all. I think that was helpful for us more from the implementation perspective.
Yeah, and I think part of that is actually part of what we've done on our side with regards to automation. So there's some tools in that we've learned over the time. So, you know, normally it used to be really resource heavy from our side as well. And taking some of those automation tools, which we can now pass on, makes everything that much easier. So it's learnings on both sides. So yeah, no, appreciate that, because a lot of people are afraid. Stefan, what does it look like?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we get asked this a lot. I mean, because the idea of a system is to make things simple, and the system will do that to effect. But you also need to be prepared as an entity and being an auditable entity. So actually, it always starts from the policy, and this is what we always say when you're coming to do a system. The system can kind of do whatever way you want, but if you don't have that policy laid out and your process for your judgments, that can be really problematic when dealing with the auditors. So we always see the really smooth audits go ahead when the client's got the policy laid out and that fits what's in within the system. Common ones that people get picked up on is bad judgments around holdovers. So when leases go off the end of the lease and what the process is there, and IBR rates. Once you have that policy piece, then the data flows in the system take care of the next steps. So obviously people need to assess a system that fits their needs, which we would be biased about. But what we did see in the early days is a lot of people rushed out and got a system that might not be fit for the purpose that was required. So nowadays people have got a much better understanding of what they need. You want automation, you want batch processing, you want it to be easy, right? It's well and good having the fanciest, most technical system, and then as soon as someone leaves, you're like, how do I drive this thing? So a constant feedback we get is the system is easy, which is quite good because IFRS 16 calculations are not easy. But that comes through to having that outlay of your policy, and then the process and the data flows goes through there to make sure that it's as efficient as possible. So it comes back to integrations and automations. Obviously, there's a lot within the system as well, but then also using the tools that are out there and other products and getting it ultimately to your ERP is probably the key things.
Yeah, I think what we've sort of touched on so far is it isn't about the system. It's about those building blocks prior, isn't it? That's making sure you've got the data. You talked about Zubair, and same with you, Pavan. You know, having those building blocks with regards to your policy, data flow, really, really important. You know, how do you see it, certainly from a communications perspective? Because you've talked about it before, Pavan, you talked about it, you know, centralisation versus decentralisation, the difference between finance and property. You know, how do you deal with that? What sort of advice can you give to others who are juggling with that, that challenge?
Yeah, I think in our scenario, Damon, we had the advantage because we kind of have accountants across the globe, and we've trained them through this process and since 2019 to identify what sounds as a lease, even if it doesn't call itself a lease, right? And we've kind of, whenever there are things, we've got that awareness across, and now that awareness is across the business, including in the commercial space, because we do use that as a lever to manage our cash flows, capital expenditure, and trying to manage our free cash flows and all of those things. So in that way, first is awareness. You need to build that awareness across your business. And we had the advantage of accountants being there who helped us in building that awareness among themselves and also in the operations. I think that's one thing which I found to be more helpful for us.
To be from your perspective, not only you came from the spreadsheet and then going through your Aussie New Zealand base, but you also had an acquisition at the same time. So how did you juggle all of those? And what advice can you give to people around that?
Yeah, managing 30 leases on a spreadsheet is okay. Still challenging, takes a lot of time, but if you're going to go up to, if you're going to add 50 leases in a month, that's a lot of work. So obviously LOIS was a solution for me. I did two things. One was we didn't have to create 50 tabs on my Excel spreadsheet. And the second one was I didn't have to hand over, because I was also in the process of handing over some of my financial reporting responsibilities. Implementing LOIS meant I didn't have to take someone through my spreadsheet. We could implement it in LOIS, and then they sort of took it on from there. So those were probably the two key things. Touching on the centralization versus decentralization, we didn't have a property department, which probably helped in some ways, but we kept all our leases centrally held. But I think if you go to a software solution, I think you can be quite flexible, whether you want it to be centralized or decentralized. Again, it's a data capture system, right? And one of the things as I was walking out, I spoke to Julie, who sort of manages LOIS for us now, and she's just in the middle of implementing a property onboarding for the business. So she's like, I just don't have time with enough activity going on in the business to read every contract. Whoever's signing up for these leases obviously are closer to the information and, can do it in 5 minutes probably.
Yeah.
So that's something else we've implemented to streamline that process even more.
And that probably flows on, Stefan, to that integration automation piece. Sort of, where do you see that?
Well, I think in a perfect world, we'd all have perfect systems that all talk to each other and they all work. And obviously, when you talk to software people, implementing an API is so easy, we can do it to anything. In the real world, it doesn't work like that. And to be as examples as a classic one, and you're still getting the data points, right? It's probably an Excel spreadsheet, but it's good to get that up front in the process, because then at some point, that data, for instance, will go into LOIS and can be ingested and batch or whatever. So the first step is to capture it, right? So the fact it's captured in the Excel spreadsheet is not necessarily a bad thing. It's all an evolution. And I think what we're seeing is there's more and more tools out there to start doing that better and get that data and make sure it's getting to the right place. Because if you don't do that, you're in trouble.
I think that flows through to, like you said, there's an evolution there, which is a really good point, which is the bottom point of the screen or the slide here is review, because everyone gets tied up in your day-to-day. No one has extra time. Everyone is at 110% capacity, but taking a step back in a tough economic environment and reviewing, etc., when you can, is actually really, really important, isn't it? I think it's underestimated by most organisations just because of those time factors. Okay, speaking of cost of time, another poll. When you're looking at certain decisions within your business, certainly from a procurement perspective, do you actually factor into the cost of the internal resource time? Now, Stefan, do you want to talk to that while I'm just going on to the polls?
Yeah, so I think depending on the business, all businesses have different ways of calculating ROI and investment decisions. Obviously, you might do an NPV or whatever. A really common factor is that you might only take into account external costs. So this is going to cost me X dollars to build, but you kind of ignore the fact that it's actually going to take up all this internal time into the decision, which if you go back to any kind of financial modeling 101, that's not the right call. But we see it all the time that we've got a resource, they've got capacity, so we don't cost them.
Yeah, fair enough. And that seems to be sort of shown in the results. 50% of people are looking at that, but the other 50% either don't know or don't do it. And I think that's really important because especially if we're looking at, like we were talking about before, people being asked to do more with less, that time becomes even more valuable.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Okay, and here we go. This is again from that EY study. There's a lot of time that people are doing on IFRS 16. If you've got 1 or 2 people within your organisation doing that for the bulk of their time, if you can save time through process automation, adaptation, etc., you can get them to do other things. And often the other things are far more exciting than IFRS 16. All due respect. Benefits. Zubair, from your side, what were the key benefits that you found from actually sorting out a process, putting in a system, etc.?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, we'll probably touch on quite a few benefits, but the ones to probably stress on is every time I look to implement something like LOIS, it's looking further what opportunities there are to leverage that system from a strategic point of view. How can you make decisions quicker, be more agile? And that's probably why we've pushed to develop this property management system in conjunction with you guys. And, that's going to, rather than having to implement 2 systems, one that does it for 16 and another one that does it properly, all you're doing is duplicating the data input in 2 systems. So that's been really good, and I'm very excited to see where that goes. The second one probably is implementing a software solution. If you're a growing business, it just allows you to grow and scale much easier. Those are probably the 2 that we have covered.
Fair enough. Pavan, what about from your side?
I think from Pavan, you've covered most of the things on your slide, but the things that where the benefits of this was it has reduced the key person risk from our end because it was all centralized at one place. There's only 1 or 2 people who knew about it, so it kind of reduces that risk for us. And the second thing is it has definitely improved the team morale once it's distributed across. For us, we worked to decentralize it. The tool was helping us in decentralizing, and in the same process across the group, we've upskilled several accountants now who know what needs to be done on this. So it was kind of a continuous improvement for the accountants across the group too.
That's a very good point, Pavan makes. That key person risk is I completely missed that, but that's a real problem a lot of businesses face in this area.
It's funny you say that because we see the downstream pain before the benefit. So what we normally find out if somebody's left is you go through, you do an MBS rating or something like that, and you get a 2. Someone says, "Oh, it's hard to use," and it's like, "Who are you?" They've been there for a month. They find the system hard. There hasn't been a handover.
Exactly.
So all of a sudden, a little bit of training, and again, it's taking the time out to force that piece. Bit of training, and then they come back and they give an 8 because no one in Australia or New Zealand will give a 10. It's not America. NPS is actually Americans. I think the last point, what I'm wanting to make around this is all of us agree there are a ton of benefits from reviewing a process to either implement a system or just actually make what you're doing that much better because there's so much benefit. What do you need then? We've got these benefits. We can put them down. They're both economic, personal, etc. Now, what more do you need to actually initiate a process to review your process? Okay, last poll of the day. Leading into what we've talked about with regards to integration of systems across the board. Like we said at the start, we found that it was a decision between property or it was a decision between finance around which system they had. So quite keen to know if people actually have two systems or they're only using LOIS. So from your perspective in your organisation, does your property team have their own system to do it? Do they use LOIS, again, a dedicated property system, spreadsheets, or do you outsource to another property company? Even from an outsourcing perspective, Stefan, like we've seen, you've got somebody doing all the work with regards to data. Do people actually take that data and put it into LOIS or use it in another way?
Yeah, well, I guess it comes back to our point earlier around the data flow going from end to end. In the early days, it definitely wasn't like that, but what we're seeing now is a lot more connections between systems. So you might have a dedicated property system, but now with the tools, it's really easy to hook it up to say LOIS or another system. Where you're really missing out is when you're on spreadsheets, right? Because then you cannot do that because it's just not a great way of storing data. And actually, it's interesting there that you've got a real mix around the options.
Yeah, well, 50% of people using LOIS for it. And look, as we say, I always coin the phrase, LOIS is great for the hardcore accounting, but some of the aesthetics of it probably aren't as great as other systems, certainly from a property perspective, because property people want something completely different to what finance people want.
Just an example in that space, Devin, we've actually in the last 12 months started using a company to help us with our property management. They had an idea to implement their software in terms of managing our lease portfolio, but we've put a hold on to that, because the last thing we want to do is duplicate information. You're going to have inconsistencies, which one's right. So, it's not always the best solution to have two systems, in my opinion.
Well, it gets back to that data flow piece Stefan mentioned from before. I mean, that's probably the fundamental, I think, that's come through today from everybody here is data flow, making sure it's accurate, making sure everybody knows where it's coming from. And probably the other pieces is people doing the jobs that they've been hired to do, not jack of all trades, master of none. What's trending? It's all the acronyms at the moment. So what we've always found is that there is always a lot of pressure and work put onto the finance teams with regards to reporting. So anything that needs reporting now always comes back to the finance teams, no matter what it is. So we talk about ESG before. It's massive. It's part and parcel of everything. The law has been passed in Australia. It's coming to New Zealand, certainly around the rest of the world. Every organisation, certainly the types of organisations that are on this webinar and who we deal with day to day, it is just a big part that they have to do, as well as wanting to do, obviously. Pavan, from your perspective, what sort of role do you play with regards to ESG and the reporting piece? And how important is that?
With the new standard, which is becoming mandatory now, I think we are on a journey to figure out what is required to start with and where we have done a gap assessment on where are the gaps, And I think one is the reporting, the structure, the whole, whatever the standards are talking about is one aspect of it. The other aspect is more to deal with data collection. That seems to be a challenge because data is embedded in your contracts, it's embedded in health and safety systems, it's across. And to pull all that information together seems to be the biggest challenge. Because as we go more, I think greenhouse gas emissions is one thing which probably over a period of time, people have found ways to capture it. But rest of the things are so siloed in the systems. It is a requirement to pull everything together. And I think that's going to be a challenge for us considering the spread that we have across the globe. Yeah,
absolutely. Severe?
Probably the one comment I'd like to make is ESG's probably been a similar journey if I look back at IFRS 19, right? So it's been around sort of 3 years. I've helped Vulcan lead their sustainability journey, and we've reported our carbon emissions formally for 3 years now. And we're probably at that point now where we think it's probably a good idea to get a software in place rather than managing it on a spreadsheet. So as we speak, that implementation is in process.
Yeah.
And again, I think the way I look at things, you know, what's the opportunity here? It's not just to compliance, tick the box. It's more, we want that emission data at a site level, so site leaders know what they're responsible for and how they can influence reducing those emissions. So there's always a positive in all of this as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good view. And as you say, there's so many parallels to it. Last but not least, Stefan, AI. I mean, where do we start?
I mean, obviously it's a massive area. I think everyone thought it was kind of a bit of a buzzword, and then ChatGPT came out with the natural language learning. And I think you'd have to probably be hiding in a box not to understand the potential of it now. These models can just, people talk about the loss of jobs because a robot will take your job. I don't think that will happen. I read an article about it's augmented intelligence, which is meaning that it still really needs a human to drive it and get the efficiency, but it will mean that those mundane tasks of data gathering and all of that can come together much better. So we see a big lot of efficiency coming from AI, and there's lots and lots of areas that it's not really the scope of this webinar to talk about it, but we'll be seeing more and more in that, and especially in the software space where we play, lots of these tools can assist those efficiencies coming through and users using them. There's some really smart stuff out there.
See, I actually think it does fall under the remit, because we were talking about process reviews. Now it's just another area that you have to add to your review process.
Yeah.
And going, okay, then is AI able to help us in any part of this? We talk about data capture and all that, which is one thing it's really good at, is capturing data if it's there and, you know, disparate boxes.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. Actually, we've been doing on the journey of developing more property tools. We've been doing a lot of customer workshops where we can. We record them, run the AI over the top, gets the key points. It can obviously then draft up what's going on, action points, and all that. Even that simple level stuff that used to be once so painful is now a lot easier to collate that data and make sure you're making good decisions.
Well, even with this webinar, what we'll do afterwards, we'll throw it through one of the AI tools and ask it a few questions, see how you guys performed, whether you get invited back or not. Be interesting, Stefan, if it's or not. Yeah. Okay, everyone, really like to thank you guys for joining in today. It's been great to have your insight, as I said, where you have come from with regards to systems only recently because of that pathway. Certainly benefits, and we saw that through the implementations and that we've done and the processes you've got. So you don't need to be scared. If you are stuck with a system that is substandard, it's that Stockholm syndrome, you don't actually need to. I think the key points around the flow of data, it just seems to ring through for everything that we're doing. And we're seeing it from, you know, these organisations that are quite decentralised in lots of ways. There's double, triple, quadruple handling of data. So if you can identify those, there are actually tools out there. Ask the question. You know, ask the question if people have done it. No, I'm sure these guys would be more than happy to talk you through their journey if you've got any specific questions. So it's not more from a sales lens, but there's a lot of learnings, a lot of experience in going through this process with lots of organisations where you can help. Any last words, Parvin, before we go?
No, I think this is something, as you said, Stockholm syndrome is something that we need to deal with, because I think we are so busy doing what we do. We forget that there are things out there which can make our life better. And these things don't cost you an arm and leg. So I think my advice is just evaluate it. You may actually find that this is one of those low-hanging fruits in your finance improvement journey, which you can definitely deal with it in a span of 4 to 6 weeks.
Subir?
Agree with Pavan's comments. I mean, you know, we're all about improvement, and this is just one aspect of that. So,
awesome.
Nothing more to add.
Great timing, guys. Right on time. Thank you very much again, and thanks to everyone for tuning in, either live or down the line. But please, any questions, give us a bell. Happy to pass on details if need be, or just talk you through your own processes.
Sure.
Till next time.
Thank you.